Hello, this is a short review of Daniel Kahneman's Noise. It was a fascinating book, similar to his previous books, very thorough, very analytical, very scientific, tries to be as objective as possible and base his theories on evidence. And interestingly, with this book, he also discusses how he could be wrong in his basic message that he's trying to get across in this book, which is that noise, which he defines as being variation in human judgments, how it can be reduced to ensure that better decisions are made from the viewpoint of organisations where it actually matters, where possibly companies are making decisions which have impacts on their financial success. He talks about how human judgment can vary enormously. So for example, he talks about how judges in the US, studies were done on judges' decisions regarding the punishment given to criminals, and what they found is that the severity of the judgment regarding the length of time in prison, whether or not to imprison or simply to fine, the judgments of even experienced judges were found to be affected by their mood, the time of day, whether or not their favourite sports team won at the weekend. So variation in one's opinion, one's assessment of something can change even at the individual level, which means that actually we disagree with ourselves over, say, a 1 week period. What he found was that doctors, their diagnoses of various ailments changed according to the time of the day. They were less likely to diagnose certain things later on in the afternoon when perhaps they were becoming tired, fatigue was setting in, so their judgment and their recommended course of action was different because of their energy levels. So this was quite interesting. He also compares the variation in judgments across humans, so comparing the judgment of one person to another person. He found huge discrepancies when it came to judges. Some judges would give, 8-year term imprisonment, whereas other judges, maybe it was just 2 or 3 years. So the variation in how severe to punish criminals among experienced judges, not amateurs or people that weren't trained in critical thinking, people that had studied, how to make objective decisions. Huge variation across judges. And so this book really is an attempt to study the source of noise in individuals and in groups. Quite interestingly, discusses group dynamics. So it discusses how a few individuals in a group can exert quite a large influence. Often the first person to speak has a disproportionately large influence on the group. Somebody who is confident can be more persuasive than perhaps people that just sit there kind of timidly. And that has the effect of influencing the group in such a way as to produce less accurate or less fair decisions and choices. So he looks at boards within companies and how decisions are made, and has recommended a method by which he tries to, he calls it hygiene, noise hygiene, and the way to try to remove sort of the noise the emotion, the mood, or the things which cause huge variation regarding what to do, in order to limit this. And he later on discusses whether or not it's desirable to limit noise, because there are some very strong arguments against completely getting rid of noise, in that judges need to have some discrepancy, there needs to be some variation for a whole variety of reasons. One of them, quite interestingly, is that if criminals, for example, think that there's a number of possible consequences for committing a particular crime, the fact that there's a multitude of possibilities deters criminal activity, rather than just having a simple rule, a black and white rule, like an algorithm. He talks about how computers are better decision makers because they're based on algorithms, simple rules, and they don't have noise. Computers don't have noise because their judgment of a situation is governed by yes or no, binary choice, whereas their opinions are subjective and change according to the context in which they're taking place and the influence of others. So he's recommended reducing noise where it's desirable to do so, but perhaps in organisations which have a creative dimension, a creative aspect, it's not desirable to completely get rid of noise. One, because humans don't want to feel like they're being treated as mere objects, being subject to tick box exercises, and being forced to be hyper-rational, to the detriment of being creative and possibly being wrong and being far out with their views and with their comments and their expressions, because there's an argument which says that in more creative fields this is desirable because it leads to discovery, it leads to innovation, because somebody might say something wild that actually turns out to have an element of truth to it. And he discusses all of this thoroughly in his usual way, which is clearly aimed at getting at the truth. It's not just a book to sell. Daniel Kahneman, extremely intelligent individual, and studied this particular topic of human bias, heuristics. By the way, bias is different to noise. Bias, one thing he does right from the outset, I'll just show you this graph to explain the difference between bias and noise, just to be clear. So he explains what noise is right from the outset. So if you look at this picture, you can see that this one, Team B, there is both noise and bias, but clearly there's bias because they're all wrong in the same direction. So they have a bias which is skewing the judgment in the same direction. Whereas if you look at Team C, it's more sporadic. One person hit the bullseye, one person was accurate with their judgment and in their assessment of something. Could be anything. Could be, one of the most important aspects of being a football manager is the judgment of which players to buy. Good football managers have good judgments. They tend to buy good players. They rarely make mistakes. If you think about Guardiola, the manager of Man City, pretty much every player he's bought has turned out to be successful. He clearly has good judgments, which has led to the signing of good players and the creation of a successful team. It's not always a case of, okay, they've spent the most money, because in the case of Manchester United, they've spent huge sums of money, but arguably the judgment of the managers they've had there have not had great judgment, because the players they seem to buy don't turn out to be particularly performing well when you look at the league table of Manchester United at the moment. But hopefully, possibly, they will improve going forward. But judgment is clearly important. And going back to these diagrams, so noise is the variation. So it's the difference between the different viewpoints. That's what noise is, and the variation can be huge, as I was trying to explain with the various judgments of judges in relation to giving certain consequences, certain sanctions for criminal behaviour. So it's really a brilliant book, and Thinking Fast and Slow was the other of Daniel Kahneman's books. Recommends thinking slowly as opposed to quickly, and says in the book, although he in an interview somewhat regretted the simplicity of his binary way of thinking about thinking, in that in the book he proposes type 1, which is fast, intuitive, instinctual, guts feeling, and type 2, which is slower, methodical, subject to rigour and critical thinking. And of course he is an advocate of type 2, of slowing down our thought processes in order to make more rational choices rather than sort of emotionally led decisions in the spur of the moment. So that was a book he wrote about 12 years ago, and this is a kind of follow-up with a specific study of noise and how our opinions and our assessments can change according to many different factors, and how much difference there is between humans. So two humans can look at the same object but see two completely different things because of the values they have, they bring, their personality, the quirks of their personality, their upbringing with their particular sort of view of the world. They bring all of that to bear, and so human perception varies enormously across the planets. It's not the case that two people looking at the same thing will see precisely the same thing. They'll view things in different ways. And Daniel Kahneman explores this, and has written this very scientific, precise book, which really does help the reader to understand this phenomenon, which has very large impacts on the world. Politicians make policies, and the disagreements that they have, their assessments of situations varies enormously. This affects us in the real world. The policies that they make have an impact on us. And there's so many examples of this where human judgment shapes the world around us. So, fascinating book. Do check it out on Amazon if you get a chance. I highly recommend it. Might be a good idea to read Thinking Fast and Slow first as a kind of starter before going on to this book. But even just by itself, this is an outstanding book. It doesn't really require Thinking Fast and Slow to be read beforehand. Thank you for watching this video, and see you again soon.